In 1939, roughly 3.5 million Hasidic and Orthodox Jews lived across Eastern Europe. Entire civilizations organized around rebbes, religious courts, schools, and printing houses, built over nearly 300 years. By 1945, most of that world was gone. The courts emptied, the dynasties shattered, the language fell silent. And yet, within a single generation, survivors rebuilt that legacy in extraordinary detail, not in Warsaw or Budapest, but in Brooklyn. How they did it begins with understanding exactly what was lost. Hasidism began in the 1740s, rooted in the teachings of Israel ben Eliezer, the Baal Shem Tov, in what is now western Ukraine. Over the next 2 centuries, dynasties took shape across Eastern Europe, each anchored in a specific town and region. Satmar grew from the Zatmar area, now Satu Mare, in Romania. Bobov and Belz developed in Galicia, a region that once stretched across parts of Poland and Ukraine. Vizhnitz established itself in Bukovina, today divided between Ukraine and Romania. Each court was more than a religious center. It became the core of a living network, connecting thousands of families. These dynasties shaped their own customs, melodies, and leadership traditions, passed through generations. Followers gathered around their rebbe, forming distinct communities with unique patterns of prayer, study, and daily life. To understand what was lost, it is necessary to see how a Hasidic court functioned as the heart of its world. At the center of each Hasidic community stood the rebbe, a spiritual leader, teacher, and guide whose authority shaped every aspect of daily life. The rebbe was more than a rabbi. He was seen as a living link to tradition, interpreting religious law and offering counsel to followers who traveled from distant towns for his advice. Surrounding the rebbe was the court, or hoif, which served as the heart of communal identity. This was not just a synagogue for prayer, but a gathering place for learning, celebration, and support. The Tish, a weekly event, brought followers together around the rebbe's table. There, lessons were shared through stories and song, bread, and blessings passed from hand to hand. The court's rhythms, its teachings, melodies, and rituals bound families into a single network, giving each member a sense of belonging within the larger dynastic world. The daily life of pre-war Hasidic communities was structured by a network of institutions that reached into every household. Each town featured a central synagogue, often surrounded by smaller prayer rooms known as shtiblek, where men gathered for the 3 daily services and informal Torah study. Boys attended religious schools and advanced yeshivas where they learned Talmud and Hasidic teachings from a young age. Mikvaot, ritual baths, stood at the heart of communal life, used for spiritual purification before prayer and on the eve of Shabbat. Kosher food was ensured by local supervision, with butchers and bakers certified by the court. Burial societies, known as Shevra Kadisha, cared for the dead and comforted mourners. Charity was organized through tzedakah funds and mutual aid societies, supporting widows, orphans, and the poor. Hebrew and Yiddish printing houses published prayer books and religious texts, sustaining a Yiddish-speaking culture in homes and marketplaces. Family life revolved around Shabbat preparation, festival meals, and acts of communal charity, creating a rhythm that bound each generation to the next. The Holocaust shattered the world of Eastern European Jewry, reducing a population of 9.5 million to fewer than 4 million by 1945. Nearly 6 million Jews were murdered, including countless members of Hasidic communities. The destruction reached far beyond individual lives. Rebbes, spiritual leaders who had guided dynasties for generations, were killed alongside their followers and families. Towns that had once echoed with the sounds of prayer, study, and song fell silent. Hasidic centers that had flourished for centuries were left empty, their courts and schools destroyed. Businesses, printing houses, and charitable societies vanished. Burial organizations which had cared for generations in life and death ceased to exist. The physical and spiritual infrastructure that had made the Hasidic way of life self-sustaining was dismantled across Poland, Hungary, Ukraine, and beyond. Survivor accounts collected by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Yad Vashem speak of the loss not only of people, but of the entire communal fabric, the networks, customs, and institutions that had defined a world. What remained was a scattering of individuals, often without leaders, community, or the means to rebuild. The devastation was not only human and geographic, but generational, cutting off the continuity that had bound each court to its past. Joel Teitelbaum, known as the Satmar Rebbe, became one of the few Hasidic leaders to carry the memory and traditions of a destroyed world into the post-war era. In 1944, his name appeared on the passenger list of the Kastner train, a controversial rescue transport that carried over 1,600 Jews out of Nazi-occupied Hungary. The train's journey paused at Bergen-Belsen, where Teitelbaum and other Orthodox leaders spent several months in an internment camp. In December 1944, Swiss officials received the group at the border, and photographs from the period confirmed Teitelbaum's arrival in Switzerland. After the war's end, he spent a brief period in Mandatory Palestine. In September 1946, records show Teitelbaum disembarked in New York, arriving aboard the Vulcania. His arrival marked the transfer of a living tradition from the ashes of Europe to American soil. While most Hasidic dynasties lost both their leaders and their communal base, Teitelbaum's survival made him a rare bearer of institutional memory, one who would soon begin the work of rebuilding, but not as a continuation of the old world, rather as a response to its loss. Williamsburg, Brooklyn became the anchor for Hasidic life in America by conscious choice, not by accident. In the late 1940s, survivor families arrived with the intention of rebuilding what had been destroyed. They sought a place where they could live close together and maintain the rhythms of communal life. The neighborhood's dense streets and affordable housing offered the chance to recreate a familiar world. According to PBS, around 60 Hasidic courts, each representing its own traditions and leadership, transplanted themselves to New York after the war, most with only a handful of families. In Williamsburg, these survivors began to carve out a public presence, renting storefronts for prayer, gathering for study, and organizing mutual aid. Their efforts were visible in the language spoken on the street and the reappearance of traditional dress. The decision to settle here was a statement of continuity, laying the groundwork for a new communal foothold in a foreign city. In the first years after arriving in Williamsburg, Hasidic families made deliberate choices about what to restore from the world they had lost. Yiddish became the language of daily life, spoken in homes, schools, and on the street, and printed in community newspapers. The familiar sounds of Yiddish helped survivors recreate a sense of belonging and continuity, even as the city around them spoke English. The religious calendar once again shaped the week. Shabbat meals, festival gatherings, and daily prayers brought families together in rhythms that echoed pre-war Europe. Traditional Hasidic clothing reappeared: long black coats, fur hats, and modest dresses. These garments, worn by men, women, and children, signaled a connection to the past but did not fully define what it meant to be Hasidic. Customary practices were passed down through parents, teachers, and the Rebbe's court, reinforcing a sense of shared purpose. Even as some younger members questioned strict dress or the exclusive use of Yiddish, the community's leaders prioritized continuity, choosing to rebuild around the customs that had once bound them together. The first Hasidic institutions in post-war Williamsburg took shape in rented rooms, storefronts, and modest buildings. In 1947, the Satmar community established Torah Ve'ira, a yeshiva that provided boys with daily instruction in Torah texts and Hasidic customs. The following year, legal records confirmed the incorporation of Congregation Yitev Lev, named for the Rebbe's grandfather, creating a central address for communal prayer and rabbinic leadership. At the same time, communal bulletins from 1948 record the publication of Vayolel Moshe, a work that argued for the preservation of tradition as a sacred obligation. Schools became the means by which language, ritual, and memory were transmitted to the next generation. Congregations organized daily and festival prayer, while charitable funds supported widows, orphans, and families in need. Ritual facilities, mikvayot, kosher butchers, and burial societies were restored to serve the community's daily life. Rabbinic authority coordinated education and practice, guiding the reestablishment of communal norms. For many, this rebuilding was more than survival. It was a spiritual duty, a refusal to allow centuries of tradition to vanish. Population growth in post-war Hasidic Brooklyn did not rely on migration alone. The community's momentum came from within, through large families, early marriage, and a dense web of kinship ties. Marriages were often arranged to reinforce extended family networks, connecting households across neighborhoods and even between different Hasidic courts. Education played a central role, with boys and girls entering religious schools at a young age and continuing through marriage. Charity organizations and business partnerships formed another layer of connection, supporting families in need and helping new ventures take root. These patterns reflected religious values and a shared sense of duty to rebuild after the devastation of the Holocaust. As families grew, pressure mounted on local housing, schools, and prayer spaces, sometimes straining the limits of Williamsburg's infrastructure. Demographers such as Sergio Della Pergola and Samuel Heilman note that precise population counts remain approximate, since community boundaries shift and reporting is often internal. Still, the mechanisms of growth, rooted in family, faith, and mutual support, became the engine of renewal. By the 1970s, Brooklyn's Hasidic neighborhoods faced more than crowded apartments and packed schools. Families pooled resources to purchase land beyond the city, forming new communities shaped by collective fundraising and careful real estate deals. Negotiations with local governments over zoning became routine, as leaders sought to preserve religious life while meeting the needs of growing families. In Rockland County, the Skverer Hasidim established New Square, which became a fully incorporated village in 1961, giving residents control over local regulations. The Satmar community, meanwhile, developed Kiryas Joel in Orange County, with its first families settling there in 1974 and incorporation as a village following in 1977. These satellite communities offered space for new generations, extending the reach of Hasidic life beyond Brooklyn's borders. Yiddish endures in Hasidic Brooklyn not as a relic, but as the shared language of daily life. In homes, children learn to speak Yiddish before English, carrying conversations from the breakfast table to the schoolyard. Classrooms use Yiddish for instruction in both religious and secular subjects, while community newspapers such as Der Yid and Der Blatt report news, publish religious commentary, and announce life events entirely in Yiddish. Religious texts, prayer books, and even business contracts circulate in the language, connecting generations across decades. In synagogues and shops, on the street and in the home, Yiddish remains the medium for greetings, debates, and family stories. This continuity stands in stark contrast to the fate of Yiddish elsewhere, where it survives mainly in archives or as a subject of academic study. As Jeffrey Chandler notes, Hasidic communities have preserved Yiddish as a living, evolving language, a spoken thread that binds together the rhythms of faith, commerce, and family life. Holiday rituals brought from pre-war Europe, lighting Hanukkah candles, singing old melodies on Passover, preparing Shabbat tables, became anchors for families who had never seen their ancestral towns. In Williamsburg, children born after 1945 learned to recite blessings and sing nigunim that had crossed continents in memory alone. The details of dress, fur hats for men, starched white aprons for women, the cut and color of coats, were debated and adjusted, but always referenced the styles their parents had worn in Galicia, Hungary, or Bukovina. Educational patterns, too, reflected this inheritance. Boys and girls attended schools that taught not only Torah and Talmud, but also the customs and songs unique to each dynasty. Dynastic identity remained central, with children taught the stories of their Rebbe's lineage, the miracles and hardships that shaped each court, and the values that set one dynasty apart from another. These customs were not static. As families moved from Williamsburg to Borough Park, or to new enclaves upstate, traditions adapted, blending influences from different courts. Yet the recognizable social structure, festivals, arranged marriages, family-led charity, and the authority of the Rebbe remained vivid. According to comparative studies by YIVO and the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, this continuity, achieved while adapting to new places and generations, stands as one of the most complete acts of cultural reconstruction in modern history. What began as the struggle for demographic survival became a functioning cultural world, where memory is lived rather than merely remembered. Today, Hasidic neighborhoods in New York and beyond stand as living proof that cultural worlds can be rebuilt from devastation. As their families and traditions grow, they challenge the notion that loss must mean extinction. In an age of erasure, the preservation of memory, lived daily, remains a quiet act of defiance.